Hi, my name is Terry. I have 3 college degrees, including a master's degree from an Ivy League university. I'm fluent in 2 languages, and I have a commercial driver's license, which allows me to operate heavy trucks, and I still can't find a job. My girlfriend's been working at a fast food restaurant for the past 9 years, but what she really wants to do is become an elementary school teacher. So every day I'm going to be coming on here and telling you guys stories about things that I think are interesting or cool, and then I'm going to teach you a little bit of Spanish until I can earn enough money to send my girl to teaching school. So today we're going to be talking about the Great Depression, everybody's favorite topic, right? So before we can talk about the Depression itself, we have to talk about some of the factors that led up to the Depression. So, setting the scene, the Republican Party is running the government for almost 10 uninterrupted years up until this point. Now, the Republicans are considered the party of big business, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means later on, but for now, all you need to know is that the party of big business means we like to let people do what they want to do. The government doesn't need to be involved in people's affairs. We need to let the individual and the corporations do what they want, because people tend to do better under those types of economies. Now, at this time, Warren G. Harding is the president of the United States, and he unexpectedly dies in office. As a result of that, Calvin Coolidge becomes the president of the U.S., and he appoints Herbert Hoover as his Commerce Secretary. Now, I want you to remember that name, Herbert Hoover, because it's going to be important later on. And so during this presidency, they cut government spending deeply, and they reduced the amount of taxes that the wealthiest Americans have to pay every year. So prior to this, the economy and the United States as a whole is in what is referred to as the Roaring Twenties. The reason why they call it the Roaring Twenties is because during this period of time, Wall Street is booming. The stock market's doing great. In addition to that, this is an excellent era for dance, for music, specifically jazz. It's somewhat of a pop cultural renaissance, and so music is better than it has ever been during this period of time. In addition to that, technology and invention are at an all-time high. A few of the inventions that came about during this 10 years was the radio, the Model T, which is a type of car, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, refrigerators, and people wanted all this stuff because this stuff made their lives easier. And so because there was such a high demand for these products, factories were producing them in overtime. I'm talking about double and triple time. And so as a result of that, there were a lot of jobs because these factories needed people to produce these products to meet the demand. And so people were taking out loans to buy all this shiny new stuff, so that they could have things to show off to people who came over to their homes, and because they wanted things that made their lives easier. In addition to taking out loans to buy things, they also took out loans to invest in the stock market. And nobody was particularly worried about the fact that a lot of people were spending money that they didn't have because the stock market was doing so well. And back then, and to a certain extent now, how well the stock market is doing is seen as an indication of how well the economy is doing. But things are not always as they seem. So, in the presidential election of 1928, Herbert Hoover is nominated as the Republican candidate. Now, I told you to remember that name, Herbert Hoover. Here it comes. So, when Herbert Hoover is running for president, he has this quote that has since become very famous. And here's what he says. "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land." And so Herbert Hoover is running against the then Democratic governor of New York, Al Smith. Now, Al Smith was a Catholic, and there are lots of people who harbor discrimination against Catholic people during this time. One of the reasons why there's such high levels of Catholic discrimination is because Catholic people, many of them were immigrants from Ireland and Italy. And these are countries that are considered to produce whites that are lesser than other whites in the United States at this time. In addition to that, Catholics are suspected of being secretly loyal to the Pope as opposed to the United States. And so some Protestant people and groups feel panic about the nomination of Al Smith. There was a rumor circulating that Al Smith would actually annul all Protestant marriages, making them null and void. Another rumor suggested that there was a tunnel that ran directly from Washington, D.C., all the way to Rome, so that the Pope could come to the White House and take over anytime he wanted. Many believed that the Pope and his priests would actually be the ones pulling the strings behind the presidency, and that Al Smith was just going to be a puppet. Now, to his credit, Hoover did not publicly bash Catholic people, the Catholic religion, or Smith's campaign outright. But state and local governments did. They circulated pamphlets that portrayed Catholic people in a negative light, that made them look bad, that made them look suspicious, and even dangerous. Another thing was that they spreaded the word that Smith was actually in favor of interracial marriages, and that was something that's not seen the way it is in the United States today. There were many people who were openly opposed to interracial marriages back in 1928, and so knowing that Smith was in favor or accepting of interracial marriages did not help him, it hurt him. So Hoover did not actively bash Catholicism during his campaign, but he didn't have to, because the economy was doing so well that he won easily. And so the Republican Party, I told you we would talk about this a little bit later, was the party of big business. And so what this means is that economies generally do better when the government keeps their hand out of it. The people don't need a babysitter, the businesses don't need a babysitter, and if you allow the businesses to do whatever they want, they'll make more profits, they'll hire more people can find jobs, and you don't really need social welfare programs, because if there are plenty of jobs, anybody who's willing to work will get a job, and if a company is doing something bad, they'll go out of business anyway because people won't buy from them. So we don't need to involve ourselves with what's going on, we need to just allow people to do what they're going to do and keep away from government overreach, with the exception of course, the military. The United States has always been willing to spend lots of money on the military. So, after October 29th, 1929, however, it is no longer cool to be the party of big business, because this is the day that historians call Black Tuesday, the day the stock market crashed, bringing a screeching halt to the Roaring '20s. So, the stock market crashed and uninsured banks went out of business. So people who had money in those banks that went out of business lost their entire life savings overnight. The demand for all these new products and inventions came to a screeching halt, which caused businesses and factories to shut down, thus resulting in a domino effect where millions lost their jobs. And then when people lose their jobs and can't pay their rent or their mortgages, they also lose their homes. Theaters closed, schools closed, and people who just recently were partying all night to live music and dancing well into the early hours of the morning now found themselves in food lines begging for generosity of others just to be able to survive. Because the schools closed, children couldn't get an education, and many children actually got sick and died from malnutrition-related illnesses as a result of deprivation of certain dietary staples, such as milk, eggs, and cheese, which their parents simply could not afford to provide for them, and so they ended up getting really, really sick, because children need those developmental staples as they grow. Many children were forced to get jobs, but because the job market was so bad, at a certain point, 25% of Americans couldn't find jobs. Teenagers what they did was they would ride the rails in order to travel to other cities to look for work. But because this was not regulated and people were jumping on and off trains, moving trains in an unregulated fashion, up to 25,000 people died in train accidents. Homeless people created what are called shanty towns, which is homeless towns where people build houses for themselves out of whatever materials they can find, including cardboard, discarded pieces of plywood. And so these shanty towns were referred to as Hoovervilles affectionately, after the last name of the president who was serving at that time. And so Herbert Hoover had no idea what to do to address these issues, and what he did amounts to very little or nothing at all. And even though all of this is happening, he still continues to argue against government overreach and government programs for the people. He slashes government funding even more and lowers the taxes on the wealthy even more. And this costs even more people their jobs. So this consumerist empire was built on a fake foundation, like a house built on shifting sand. And because the foundation was not real, ultimately it had to inevitably come crashing down. And so in 1932, Herbert Hoover ran for the presidency again against Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and FDR won in a landslide, of course. When FDR became president of the United States, he went to work immediately, instituting massive social safety net programs that are very wide-ranging to help those in need. And ultimately, his actions end up bringing a stop to the Great Depression. Now, after this, the American people begin to accept this idea that the United States does need some type of government oversight. One example would be the FDIC insurance. So if you ever go to a bank, maybe you see a little logo that says FDIC. What that means is that this bank has insurance from the federal government. That we guarantee that if this bank goes out of business, you won't lose all your money because your money is backed by the U.S. government. And so prior to those regulations, people just lost their money if their bank went out of business. In addition to that, the government needed some type of social safety net programs. For instance, unemployment for people who got laid off so that they could still afford to feed their children. So, the Spanish that I'm going to teach you today is Muéstrame el dinero. Muéstrame el dinero. And what that means is, show me the money. If you like this video or you learned something new, drop a like down below. If you'd like to help support this work that I do, there will be a link to the Cashapp in the description box. And as always, if there's a specific topic you'd like to see me do a video on, leave a comment down below. We'll see you next time.